The gravel path that wound through the east courtyard of Lone Star Children's Medical Center had never been designed with wheelchairs in mind. The back left wheel caught first, wedged between two limestone pavers that a landscaper had set just a fraction too far apart. The chair listed slightly, and the little girl in it didn't react. She just stared at the overcast Texas sky with eyes that had stopped expecting things. Cassandra Merritt planted both heels and pulled. The wheel didn't budge. She was in her best suit, the charcoal one she wore when she needed to feel armored. Her meeting with the specialist had ended 11 minutes ago, and the words were still echoing somewhere between her ears and her chest. "We've tried everything we can recommend at this stage, Ms. Merritt. The spinal damage is simply too extensive." She'd thanked the man. She'd shaken his hand. She'd walked out without crying because that was what she did. Now she was stuck on a gravel path with a wheelchair and a daughter who hadn't spoken in 4 days. "Can I give you a hand?" The voice came from behind her. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to announce itself. She turned. A man stood a few feet back on the path, one hand in the pocket of a worn canvas jacket, the other holding the hand of a small girl who couldn't have been more than 6. He had slightly long, dark hair showing the first threads of gray, and the particular stillness of someone who spent a lot of time around sick people. The little girl beside him clutched a small canvas bag printed with red crosses. "The wheel's caught on the joint between those two pavers," he said. "If you angle it toward you while I lift the back—" "I've got it," Cass said. "Okay." He didn't move away. She pulled again. The wheel ground against the stone and held fast. A beat of silence. "Angle toward you," he said gently. She angled. He stepped forward, lifted the back of the frame with the effortless precision of someone who had done exactly this 100 times, and the wheel came free. Mia still didn't react. The little girl beside the man, however, leaned forward with enormous interest, studying Mia with the frank curiosity that only children can get away with. "What's her name?" she whispered up to her father. "I don't know yet," he said. Cass looked at him. "Thank you," she said, meaning it and also meaning, "Please stop talking to me." He nodded once, reading her correctly. But the little girl had already taken one step forward. "Hi," she said to Mia, completely unbothered by the silence or the wheelchair or the blank stare. "I'm Penny. I'm a doctor." She held up the canvas bag as evidence. Mia blinked. It was the first reaction she'd given anyone in 4 days. Cassandra Merritt had not grown up planning to run a medical technology company. She'd grown up planning to escape one. Her father, Dr. Raymond Merritt, had been one of the most respected neurologists in the country, a UT Southwestern legend, the kind of researcher who got invited to give keynotes at conferences in Zurich and Tokyo, whose name appeared in the acknowledgments of other people's landmark papers because he'd quietly solved the problem that had blocked them for years. He was brilliant, generous, and almost entirely absent from the parts of Cass's childhood that she most needed him for. She'd earned her MBA from Harvard out of something between admiration and spite. She'd taken a position in private equity, building a reputation as someone who could walk into a struggling company, understand its structure in 48 hours, and fix what was actually broken rather than what looked broken. She was good at it. She was, by most accounts, exceptional. She was 35 and on the fast track to a managing director role when the call came from Austin. A lab fire. An oxygen line. Her father's research annex late on a Wednesday night when he'd been working alone, which he always did when he was close to something. He died before the paramedics reached him. The board of Merritt NeuroWorks, the company her father had built over 30 years of patents, partnerships, and stubborn vision, turned to her 2 weeks after the funeral. They needed a CEO. They needed someone who carried the Merritt name and the financial credibility to stabilize the company's valuation. They needed her. She said yes, because she didn't know how to grieve, and she had always been better at working. At 37, she became one of the youngest female CEOs in medical technology. She moved back to Austin. She learned the products, the pipeline, the politics. She did everything right. And then, 8 months ago, she was driving Mia home from a soccer game on a rain-slick stretch of I-35. A delivery truck ran a red light. The driver walked away. Mia did not. The spinal cord injury had been classified as incomplete, which the doctors explained meant there was structural damage, but not a complete severing. It was supposed to be the good news, but 3 months after the accident, Mia still could not move her legs. She had seen specialists flown in from Johns Hopkins, from the Mayo Clinic, from a private neurological institute in Munich. Each one had reviewed the imaging, conducted their assessment, and arrived at what Cass privately called the diplomatic shrug, careful language designed to manage expectations without actually saying the word permanent. With sustained therapy, some functional recovery is possible, they would say. Not likely, not expected, possible. Each night after Mia fell asleep, Cass sat in the chair beside her hospital bed and read the medical files by lamplight the way she used to read acquisition reports, looking for the number that didn't add up, the sentence that contained the actual information hidden beneath the careful phrasing. She hadn't found it yet. The man's name was Dr. Eli Croft. She learned this not at the hospital, but 3 days later, when the front desk called to say that a Dr. Croft had left his card and asked if she would be willing to speak with him about her daughter's case. She almost said no. She looked up his name instead. What she found was complicated. Eli Croft had been, by every account from 6 years ago, one of the most gifted neurosurgeons in the country. He'd completed his residency at UT Southwestern at 29, which was not supposed to be possible, and been granted attending privileges at 31, the youngest in the department's history. He'd been a direct mentee of her father's. His early published research on spinal cord regeneration had drawn attention from institutions across the country. And then, 2 years ago, his name had largely disappeared from the literature. There was a gap. And when she looked harder at the gap, she found fragments, a malpractice filing, a settlement, a professional departure from Austin's medical community. She couldn't find the details. The case had been resolved quietly. She called him back. He arrived at Lone Star Children's with Penny, which Cass hadn't expected. She'd asked to meet in the small family consultation room on Mia's floor. When the door opened and the little girl walked in carrying her canvas doctor bag, Cass felt her professionally arranged defenses recalibrate. "I hope it's all right," Eli said, reading her expression. "She goes where I go." "Fine," Cass said. She had positioned herself on the far side of the table, which was how she handled most meetings where she wasn't certain of the other party's intentions. "I'll be direct," she said. "I've had specialists from 3 countries evaluate Mia's case. I'm not sure what you think you can offer that they haven't." Eli didn't flinch at the bluntness. He set a worn leather satchel on the table and looked at her steadily. "I was with your father for 6 years, he said. "I was present for the last 14 months of his spinal regeneration research before the accident. He trusted me with his working notebooks, everything he hadn't formally published yet." Cass felt something shift in her chest. She kept her face still. "That research is the intellectual property of Merit NeuroWorks." "The published work, yes," Eli said calmly. "The notebooks were a personal gift. He gave them to me 4 months before he died. I think he knew he was close to something and wanted the work to continue regardless of what happened to him." The room was quiet. "Why are you here now?" she asked. "Mia's case has been covered in 2 medical journals. Why now and not 6 months ago?" "Because 6 months ago I was still working up the nerve," he said, and the honesty of it caught her off guard. She let him see Mia. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and watched. Penny went first. The little girl walked directly to Mia's bedside with the matter-of-fact confidence of a doctor making rounds, set her bag on the edge of the bed, and began unpacking it. A toy stethoscope, a small notepad, a tiny brass compass on a clip that she attached to the outside of the bag before closing it. "My patients are very sick," Penny said seriously, producing a one-eyed stuffed dog. "This is Gerald. He has a bad leg. Do you want to be my nurse?" Mia stared at her. "I pay in crackers," Penny added. Something flickered across Mia's face. It was small and fast, but Cass saw it. It was the first thing that had crossed her daughter's face in 3 days that wasn't absence. "Okay," Mia said. Cass stopped breathing. She let him come back. She told herself it was provisional, 1 week, supervised, with a full review of his methods. She told herself she was doing due diligence, not giving in to something as unreliable as hope. But the truth was she had watched her daughter say one word to a 6-year-old with a stuffed dog and felt for the first time in 3 months like the floor was still under her feet. Eli's approach was unlike anything the other specialists had used. Where they had been precise and clinical, conducting structured assessments, measuring responses, documenting findings, Eli worked in a way that looked almost casual from a distance. He combined neural stimulation protocols with activities that Mia chose. He incorporated Penny as a co-conspirator in what he called pathway games, exercises designed to engage the neural circuitry between Mia's brain and her lower body through play rather than clinical repetition. The brain doesn't process healing and fun differently, he explained to Cass one afternoon as they watched Penny instruct Mia to hold a small flashlight at a very specific angle because Gerald's surgery required it. It processes engagement. Your father understood that. It's why his research always started with the patient's emotional state, not just the physical injury. Every time he mentioned her father, something inside Cass became complicated. She had spent 2 years running a company built on her father's work while not fully understanding it. She had read the summaries, mastered the financial projections, navigated the board politics. But the actual science, the thing that had lit her father's face up from the inside, the thing that had made him skip dinners and birthdays and school plays, she had never let herself try to understand it. Because understanding it would have meant grieving him properly, and she hadn't been ready for that. Elle spoke about her father's work with the ease of someone who had lived inside it. And for the first time, Cass found herself asking questions that had nothing to do with liability or IP. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks into Eli's treatment. He was working with Mia on a targeted stimulation exercise, gentle electrical pulses along specific spinal segments, combined with a concentration game that Penny had designed involving blocks and what she called the magic color sequence. Mia was frowning at the blocks, concentrating hard, when she went suddenly still. Then she gasped. "I felt something," she said. She looked down at her foot with an expression Cass had never seen on her daughter's face before, a kind of stunned, disbelieving wonder. "My toe! I think I just moved my toe." Cass was across the room before she'd consciously decided to move. She watched as Mia stared at her foot with fierce concentration, and then, slowly, unmistakably, with enormous effort, her big toe moved. It wasn't much. It was barely visible. It was everything. Penny threw her arms in the air and cheered as though a championship had just been won. Mia burst into tears that were nothing like the flat, exhausted crying Cass had witnessed since the accident. These were the tears of someone who had just been handed back something they thought was gone forever. Cass couldn't speak. She looked up at Eli, who was maintaining his professional composure with the practiced effort of someone who understood that this moment belonged entirely to the patient and her family. But his eyes were bright. "The pathways are beginning to reconnect," he said quietly. "This is the first signal. It won't be the last." He placed a brief, careful hand on Cass's shoulder. There and then gone, a gesture that acknowledged the weight of the moment without trying to own it. It was the first time since the accident that Cass allowed herself to feel something that was not fear dressed up as control. If you liked what you just heard, subscribe. This story is just getting started. The boardroom of Merit NeuroWorks had a view of Lake Travis that cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Denton Hale had chosen the seat with the best view of that window, which was how Cass knew he'd arrived early and staged himself. Denton always staged himself. He'd been with the company for 9 years, hired by her father as research director, retained by Cass because removing him without cause would have triggered board turbulence she hadn't needed in her first year. He was intelligent and politically careful, and he had the particular talent of people who sense which way power is flowing and position themselves accordingly. He opened a manila folder with deliberate slowness. "I felt it was my responsibility to bring this to your attention," he said, "given the liability implications for the company." The folder contained a malpractice filing dated 26 months ago, a civil suit against Dr. L. Croft, alleging that experimental treatment administered to a terminally ill patient had accelerated her death. News article printouts with headlines designed to be memorable. A court filing notation indicating the case had been settled out of court. The patient was his wife, Denton said, Claire Croft, stage 4 glioblastoma. He used an experimental neural suppression protocol, largely based on your father's unpublished research, incidentally, and she died 8 days into the treatment. Cass looked at the file without touching it. Her family filed the suit, Denton continued. It was settled confidentially. Dr. Croft left Austin shortly after and has not practiced in a major institutional setting since. He folded his hands. I think you can see why I'm concerned about the methods he's using with Mia, and what it would mean for Merit NeuroWorks if— Thank you, Denton, Cass said. The flatness of her voice ended the meeting. She sat with the file for 3 hours before she did anything. She read it the way she read everything, looking past the surface presentation to what the document was actually saying. What it was actually saying was this. A man had tried an experimental treatment on his dying wife. The treatment had not saved her, and her family had blamed him. That was not the same thing as negligence, but it was also not nothing. What it meant for Mia, that was the question that moved through her like cold water as the afternoon light shifted across her office. Was Eli driven by genuine healing or by a desperate private need to redeem the loss of his wife through another patient? Was he doing science or penance? She didn't confront him that evening. She made a phone call instead. The Luzerne Clinic in Switzerland had been recommended to her by 2 of the Johns Hopkins specialists. It was exactly what Eli's approach was not: institutional, methodical, peer-reviewed, insured. Their spinal regeneration program had a documented success rate published in 3 separate journals. It cost $420,000 for a 3-month residential program, and they had a spot available in 2 weeks. She said she'd take it. That night, after Mia was asleep, she sat across from Eli in the hospital's small family lounge and placed the file on the table between them. She watched his face. What she saw was not guilt. It was something older and heavier. The face of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had almost grown accustomed to the weight. "Were you going to tell me?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "when I believed you were ready to hear it clearly and not through someone else's framing. You were treating my daughter with experimental methods. You didn't think I had a right to know your history." He didn't flinch. "Claire was dying," he said. "The conventional treatments had failed. She'd had 3 rounds of chemo that hadn't slowed the progression, and she asked me to try the protocol. We both understood the risk. It wasn't something I did to her. It was something we decided together." His voice was steady now, and she could hear how many times he had told this story, how many times he had been forced to distill it down to something that could be understood quickly. "When she died, her family needed someone to blame. I understood it. I would have wanted to blame someone too." He looked directly at Cass. "Your father testified on my behalf. He reviewed the protocol, the timelines, the outcome, and he testified before the review board that the treatment was medically sound, that Claire's death was disease progression, not error. The case was dismissed, but by then I'd already left." Cass was quiet. "The compass," she said suddenly. Eli looked at her. "The little brass one Penny has on her bag. My father gave you that." Something moved across his face. "His last week in the lab," he said. "He said it was for when the data pointed in too many directions at once." She went ahead with the Switzerland arrangements anyway. She told herself it was the responsible decision, that a $420,000 peer-reviewed program at an internationally recognized clinic was demonstrably safer than continuing with a man whose past was complicated by tragedy and whose methods existed largely outside formal documentation. She didn't tell herself that she was also afraid of how much she had begun to trust him, and of what it would cost her if that trust turned out to be misplaced. She told Eli the morning the arrangements were finalized. He went very still when she told him. The professional composure held, but something around his eyes changed. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and careful. Mia is responding. Neural regeneration isn't like restarting a computer. You can't pause the process and resume it somewhere else without consequences. The pathways we've been building over the last 3 weeks are fragile. Interrupt them now and they may not reconnect the same way. The Luzerne Clinic has documented outcomes, Cass said. I know, I've read them. He paused. Their outcomes are excellent for patients who haven't already begun active regeneration. Mia has. What we're doing right now is working, and moving her to a new protocol, even a good one, carries real risk of regression. His eyes held an intensity that reminded her uncomfortably of her father in the middle of a research argument. The absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about and was frustrated by the gap between what he knew and what he could prove in time. I understand you're doing what you think is right for her, he said finally. He said goodbye to Mia that afternoon. Cass stood in the doorway and watched him explain, gently, carefully, that Mia would be going on a special trip to help her legs get stronger. Mia's face went through several things at once. Then she looked at Penny. Penny, who had been quiet for most of this, reached into her canvas bag and removed the small brass compass, the miniature one that lived on the outside of the bag, the one Cass had never seen her without. She held it out to Mia. For when you don't know which way, Penny said with complete seriousness. Mia took it. Cass looked away. The morning of the flight, Mia didn't speak. She let herself be dressed and helped into the wheelchair and rolled through the lobby of Lone Star Children's without a word. The medical transport team was efficient and kind. The private terminal at Austin Bergstrom was quiet at 7 in the morning. They were halfway to the boarding gate when Mia stopped, not because the wheelchair caught on anything. She just put both hands on the wheels and refused to move. I don't want to go, she said. Her voice was small, but it was not uncertain. Baby, Cass said, kneeling beside her, the doctors in Switzerland have equipment that… Dr. Eli is already helping me, Mia said. I moved my toe. Penny said I'll move my whole foot next. She looked at her mother with eyes that were, for the first time since the accident, fully present. She's never wrong about medical stuff. The transport team exchanged a look. Cass tried 3 more times. Mia didn't move. Then one of the gate agents approached and said a package had been delivered to the terminal, addressed to Mia Merritt. Inside was a drawing on notebook paper. 2 little girls standing upright, holding hands, both smiling enormously. One had a doctor bag. One was very clearly Mia. In the corner was a small red handprint. Penny's. Beneath the drawing was a folded note. The handwriting was Eli's. Careful, precise, the handwriting of someone trained to write clearly under pressure. In your father's last notebook, he wrote, healing lives at the intersection of what the science says is possible and what the patient believes is true. Mia has both right now. Don't take her away from her own recovery. E. Cass sat down on a terminal bench with the drawing in her lap. She sat there for a long time. She thought about her father who had skipped dinners and birthdays and school plays because he had believed in something that mattered. She had spent 2 years protecting his legacy without understanding it, preserving the form of what he'd built without fully trusting the substance. She thought about Mia's toe moving. She thought about a 6-year-old handing over her most important possession without hesitation. She took out her phone. Eli answered on the first ring. Don't go back to San Antonio, she said. We're not going to Switzerland. Drop a comment if you felt that moment. Keep going, it only gets better from here. The door to her father's private research annex had not been opened in 2 years. It was attached to the northeast corner of the Merritt NeuroWorks campus, accessible only through a corridor that required executive keycard access. After the fire in the main lab, Raymond Merritt's personal research wing had been sealed and left intact, partly by legal necessity during the investigation, and partly because Cass had never been able to bring herself to enter it. She opened it on a Tuesday morning with Eli standing beside her. The air recycler hummed back to life with a sound like a slow exhale. The lab was immaculate and untouched, the particular stillness of a room that had been paused rather than abandoned. Her father's coffee mug, a calendar still showing the month of his death, A photograph of Cass and Mia, a birthday photo, Mia maybe 5, both of them making silly faces, pinned to a corkboard above the main terminal. Cass stood in the doorway and didn't go in for a moment. Eli waited. "He was working late that night," she said. "Not to him particularly, just to the air." "He was always working late," Eli said. And then, quietly, "He talked about you, you know, constantly. He was proud of you. He had a strange way of showing it. He thought you didn't need him to show it. He thought you already knew." Eli's voice was careful. "I told him once that assuming someone knows something important is the laziest form of love. He disagreed. We never settled it." Cass stepped into the room. She crossed to the main computer terminal and entered her override code. The system came up slowly, 2 years of dormancy working through its startup sequence. She stepped back and let Eli sit. "Everything he was working on is still here," she said. "Finish it." The words came out more simply than she'd expected, but they were the right words. Over the next 4 weeks, Eli worked in her father's lab every morning and treated Mia every afternoon. He assembled a small team of 3 Merit NeuroWorks researchers who had worked closely with Raymond. People Cass trusted, people who had been quietly frustrated by the direction of the research since her father's death. She pointedly excluded Denton Hale, who noticed the exclusion and said nothing, which meant he was already calculating. The neural regeneration protocol they developed combined the formal elements of Raymond's published work with the refinements in the private notebooks and Eli's clinical experience from 3 years of rehabilitation cases, patients whose recoveries had taught him things no controlled trial could. "He wrote in shorthand," Eli said one evening, frowning at a notebook page covered in Raymond's dense, sideways script. "Half the notation assumes the reader already has context they don't have." "That's how he talked, too," Cass said from across the lab table where she'd been reviewing the treatment records. "He'd start sentences in the middle. He once explained an entire new surgical approach to me in a metaphor about highway on-ramps," Eli said. "I was nodding for 20 minutes before I understood he was being literal." Cass laughed. It surprised her, the laugh and how easy it had come. These moments accumulated quietly over the weeks. Shared references to her father, small acts of translation, Eli making sense of the science for her, Cass making sense of the company's history for him. She began to see what the partnership between her father and Eli had actually been. Raymond, the theorist with the grand architectural vision. Eli, the surgeon with the rare ability to build what the theorist imagined. Neither of them complete without the other. She began to understand, for the first time, exactly what she'd lost when her father died. Mia and Penny became regular fixtures in the lab's small observation area, where they ran an elaborate parallel medical practice for a rotating cast of stuffed animals. Penny kept a small notebook of Mia's progress. Mia moved 2 toes today, and also her ankle went a little, written in the careful, large handwriting of a child who understood that records mattered. One evening, as Cass reached for the same data tablet as Eli, their hands crossed. Neither moved away immediately. "Thank you," she said, "for not walking away when I almost sent her to Switzerland." "Your father told me once that the Merits don't quit," Eli said. "They just take the scenic route to the right answer." She recognized the dry humor, it was her father's, and smiled. "He stole that from someone else," she said. "Absolutely," Eli agreed. "He stole everything and made it sound like his." The night before Mia's major treatment procedure, the full neural stimulation protocol they'd spent 6 weeks developing, Cass went to the lab and found Eli running final simulations. She brought 2 coffees. She sat beside him, and they watched the neural mapping patterns move across the screen in slow, branching lines. The brain's internal conversation with a body it was trying to remember how to talk to. "I trust you," she said, not loudly. "Not because my father did, because I've watched you work. I've watched what you do with Mia and with Penny and with your father's research. You don't treat people like problems to be solved." She paused. "You treat them like they matter." Eli looked at the screen for a moment before he replied. "She's going to be okay," he said. I want you to know that I'm telling you that as a scientific assessment, not a reassurance." Cass nodded. They sat in the quiet of her father's lab and watched the neural pathways branch and glow. And the silence between them was not the silence of two strangers. 4 months and 11 days after Eli Croft walked into Mia Merritt's hospital room, Mia took her first steps. They were in the physical therapy room on the 3rd floor of Lone Star Children's, a room with windows facing east that filled with morning light at exactly this hour. The walking frame Eli had designed was lighter than the standard model, built for Mia's specific height and gait pattern. She gripped it with both hands. Penny stood 6 feet away, arms outstretched, serving as the official destination. "You have to walk to me," Penny said, "because I'm the senior physician and I'm ordering you to." Mia took 1 step, then another, then 3 more, slow and deliberate, her face set with the ferocious concentration of someone doing the hardest thing they've ever done and understanding exactly what it means. Penny caught her in a hug that nearly knocked them both down. Elle was monitoring the vitals, watching Mia's movement patterns with clinical precision, because someone had to, because this was a medical event and not just an emotional one. But the look on his face was not clinical. Cass was not doing anything professionally. She was crying, unashamedly and fully, the way she hadn't let herself cry once in the 14 months since the accident, because she'd been too busy holding everything together. "Remember," Eli told Mia gently, crouching to her eye level, "this is the beginning, not the finish line. Your brain is learning a new language with your legs. It takes time and practice." Mia considered this. "Can Penny help me practice?" "I'm already her doctor," Penny said firmly. Obviously, that evening, for the first time, Cass invited Eli and Penny to her home for dinner. Not as medical providers, as people. Penny explored the house with the thoroughness of a health inspector, declaring each room either satisfactory or needing improvement. Mia trailed after her in the walking frame, narrating the tour. Their voices carried down the stairs in overlapping bursts, laughter and argument, and the particular sound of children who have decided they are best friends. Cass and Eli stood on the back porch, looking out over the lights of Austin in the early dark. "I'm establishing the Raymond Merritt Foundation," she said, "focused on pediatric neural regeneration, research, clinical access, training programs for rehabilitation clinics that can't afford specialist staff." She paused. "I want you to be the founding medical director." Eli was quiet for a moment. "My reputation," he started. "Your reputation," she said, "is currently in the process of being substantially revised." She turned to face him. "The Medical Review Board completed a formal reassessment of Claire's case last month. My father had left detailed documentation in the research annex, clinical notes supporting every decision you made in that protocol. The board issued a formal clearance last week." She watched his face process this. "I may have made some calls, leveraged some relationships, made sure the right people reviewed the right materials." Eli looked at her. "You did that without telling me," he said. "You treated my daughter without telling me about your past," she said. "I think we're even." Something in his expression shifted, the particular look of a man who has carried a weight alone for a long time and has just felt someone else put a hand on it. "The foundation will give you resources and reach," Cass said. "Other kids like Mia. Clinics like yours in San Antonio that are doing real work without institutional support." She looked back out at the city. "My father built something important. I've spent 2 years protecting it without fully understanding it. I'd like to actually finish what he started." "That's what he would have wanted," Eli said. "I know," she smiled. He told Penny, 1 year after the gravel path and the stuck wheelchair and a small girl with a doctor bag, Mia Merritt walked unassisted onto the stage of the Raymond Merritt Foundation's inaugural gala. Her steps were steady, her chin was up. She reached the microphone and adjusted it down to her height with the business-like efficiency she'd learned from watching her mother, and then she looked out at the room. "I want to tell you about my heroes," she said. "They are Dr. Eli and Dr. Penny." She paused. "Penny is 6, in case you're wondering." Penny, seated in the front row in a dress she'd been bribed into wearing, straightened with enormous dignity. From further back in the room, Cass watched. She watched her daughter standing on two legs in a room full of people who were going to fund research that might do for other children what it had done for Mia. She watched Eli, seated to her left, not on the stage, because he'd insisted the night belonged to Mia, watching the same thing. And she thought about a gravel path and a wheel that wouldn't move, and a man who'd said, "Let me give you a hand," and hadn't left. She thought about her father's compass, small and brass and old, that Penny had given to Mia, and that Mia had carried to Switzerland and back, and now kept on her nightstand. "Science tells you how," her father had said. "This tells you which way." She thought she was finally beginning to understand what he meant. Real healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic moment with music behind it. It comes quietly, in a toe that moves when it wasn't supposed to. In a child who says, "okay" to a stuffed dog and a stranger's daughter. In a woman who opens a door she's kept locked for 2 years and lets the grief and the hope exist in the same room at the same time. We spend so much time looking for the person or the institution or the treatment that has all the answers, the one with the impressive credentials and the documented success rates and the approved methods. And sometimes that person exists. But sometimes the right help comes wearing a worn jacket and carrying a daughter who sees no difference between healing stuffed animals and helping a real friend walk. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't trusting someone whose past is complicated. It's refusing to trust anyone at all, because that keeps you safe, and it keeps your child stuck. The bravest thing Cassandra Merritt did was not building a medical technology empire, or navigating a boardroom, or flying in specialists from 3 countries. It was standing in a private terminal with a drawing of 2 little girls holding hands, and choosing hope over the appearance of certainty. That's the choice worth making, every time. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.